wanted to talk about Oculus. Of course, the PlayStation VR is launching really soon, later this week. But Oculus Connect was earlier this week. And Jimmy, you were down south. You were down south in California checking this out.
Yeah, it was actually late last week, and it was a 3-day event in San Jose, California, where they revealed the Touch pricing, which is their motion track controllers.
And we've seen the Touch controllers before. It's like they're a much nicer version of tracking controllers than we've seen for other controllers, more in line with what the Vive has, right?
It is in line with what the Vive has. I would say it's actually more ergonomic even. Very comfortable to hold. Basically, inside VR games, it takes the shape of your hands. I feel like the Vive controllers are more like something that you hold for the most part. They represent like a sword or something like that.
But the pricing is what was the new thing. How much do these things cost?
So it's coming out December 6th, and it's going to be retailing for $199. Which is
for both controllers. It's not like $199 for just one.
It's not like $400 for the
per controller.
So it
still
comes
a lot though.
It's still a lot. It comes with an additional sensor, which you'll need for a wider kind of camera FOV. Still though, it doesn't provide room scale experiences out of the box. For that, you'll need to buy a third sensor, which costs $79.
So when you say like a room scale VR experience, what does that mean exactly?
So room scale is basically a mode in VR that allows you to like walk around your living room space. Most VR games have you either sitting down or sometimes they'll have like standing experiences. Like I think PlayStation VR really tackles that front, seated and standing.
Yeah, generally when you see people playing these VR games, you're just kind of seated in front of your TV. But when you see people playing on the Vive, they have the cameras set up and it's a much more elaborate setup, but it does allow you to walk around. And so this will allow the Vive to be more room scale, to let you walk around in that space, right?
Yes, and with the third sensor, you're going to be able to have this thing that they call the Guardian system, and that basically you can map out your environment. So within VR, when you're effectively blindfolded, you can kind of see where your walkable space is. Like there'll be like a blue grid that pops up when you get too close to a wall.
So it's not Destiny related then? Different Guardian?
Right.
Okay.
And so, it's going to be $200 plus, effectively $200 plus the headset, which is $600. So that's basically $800 the price of the Vive.
And then also the third sensor to make it a room scale experience.
If you wanted to get the third sensor to get room scale, then it's going to be close to $880.
So it sounds like in order to achieve what Vive already offers, it's about $80 more. Is that correct mathematically?
Yes, but they do. So I spoke to Jason Rubin about it, and I asked him about the pricing, because I think it was to get room scale is more expensive than I thought, and I imagine what most people thought. But he said, like, yeah, it is technically a little bit more expensive, but they throw in like an Xbox controller, they throw in like a remote, they throw in like some games and things like that. So he thinks it's pretty comparable. And while it is expensive, I was able to play about a half dozen games or so, and I was really blown away.
Yeah, there were some specific games that you thought were really good, and things that some that we have played before on other VR consoles, or that we played on Oculus, and some that were brand new.
Right. There are 3 in particular that I played that really impressed me. The first one is a game that is technically out now, but the version that I played was retrofitted, or basically redone to work in VR, and that was Superhot VR.
Which is a really good game on itself.
Yeah, I haven't played the original on PC or consoles, but I felt like from what I played, it's a game that's like tailor-made for VR. So the premise is it's a first-person shooter for the most part, even though you can punch and things like that as well. And for whatever reason, there's these like red polygonal goons that are out to kill you, and they can do so by either punching you or shooting you. And when they hit you once, either by a fist or a bullet, you die. And it takes place in a very kind of white environment.
So in the real game, when you move the controller, that's when things start moving. Like if somebody shoots a bullet at you, the bullet isn't actually moving towards you until you start moving. So I assume in VR, like you have to either stand stock still, or when you move in VR, that's when the action starts occurring around you.
Yeah, so the gimmick is that when you stand still, bullets and things like that, and your enemies move very, very slowly. As soon as you start to move, that's when like the speed kicks up. And so it's a constant like juggling act of when do I move slow and when do I move fast, and you can also disarm your opponents. So if they're holding a gun, you can like quickly reach out and grab the gun and shoot them back. And there are multiple levels within the game, and then within each level there are multiple stages. So I think for the most part they had like 4 or 5 stages within a level. And let's say you made it to the 4th or 5th stage. If you died on that stage, you have to start the whole entire level all over again. So this kind of puts you in a sort of trial and error kind of mode. But normally I hate that, but for this game I actually really admired it. It made you sort of remember back to like, okay, what is this next scenario going to entail? And then you might remember like, okay, to my right, there's going to be a goon with a gun. So I'll have to like quickly grab his gun, then like maybe shoot him. Yeah. There's going to be a goon to my left. I'll have to shoot him. And then I'll have no bullets left. Then I'll have to grab the bottle in front of me. Then I'll have to chuck it down at the opponent running towards me down the hallway.
So the other 2 games you played were new experiences. These weren't things that we'd played before, right? Lone Echo and the Unspoken?
Yeah, so Lone Echo is like a sci-fi space exploration game. It's made by Ready at Dawn, and I think they made some of the Uncharted games, the mobile ones.
The mobile,
right?
Yeah. I think Naughty Dog made
the PSP stuff. And
they also did the Order 1886, right?
Yeah, I think so. So there's like a single-player component which has you controlling a robot named Jack. And that game has you floating around a space station. What makes that game interesting is how you traverse the environment. So there is no, unlike many other VR games, there's no teleportation. You actually just float around through space. And normally things like that tend to make people, including myself, motion sick. But I didn't experience really any motion sickness. How they're doing it is like when you float around, you can like grab onto objects and walls in the environment and push off. And there are also thrusters on your robot wrist that allow you to like move forward. So you just aim like where you want to go by pointing your wrist in the right direction. So there was that, but what really made the experience really fun for me was the multiplayer, which is, I guess, a cross between Rocket League, Tron, and though I haven't read it, Ender's Game. So what it is a 5v5 game in a spaceship, and you have like a Tron-like disc that you're trying to get into the goal.
And you also have to play against 12-year-olds.
Yes. Although fortunately, when I was at Oculus Connect, I was playing with like 9 other people from the press or whatever.
Strangers. That's almost worse.
Strangers that I didn't know. We were all in different rooms, but it felt like we were all like floating in this spaceship together, and we were just hilariously laughing and shouting at each other. And I remember there's this one point. So there's another mechanic in the game where you can grab an opponent and you can punch him in the face, and that kind of like puts him out for like 2 seconds. They can't move. So I remember there was one part where I had the disc and I was flying towards their goal, but I was a little too high. So I communicated towards my teammate that there was somebody behind me and I was going to pass it to them. And my teammate was headed right towards the goal. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pass it to you right now. And I passed it to him, and he's like slowly floats up to the goal, has the thing, chucks it, and he misses. And I'm like, you had one job. So I'm like screaming at him.
This sounds like Rocket League, yeah.
Yeah. So that game was really awesome.
And the last one was The Unspoken, which sounds like a horror game.
The Unspoken is a 1v1 wizard dueling game.
So not quite horror.
Yeah,
but
it's not really a horror game.
It does sound like that though.
So in that game, all these games use the touch controllers, and in that game you can, if you're like the firecaster, you can hold down the right trigger to like form a fireball in your hand. You can like chuck it at people with your left, or like non-dominant hand, you can hold down the left trigger to like form a temporary shield that you can bounce spells back. And then there are like fancier other gestures that you can do, like you can cross your arms, hold down the triggers, wait for a timer to appear, and then like chuck them at the ground, and then like a giant shield, like temporary shield, will block all incoming attacks. And you could do other like fancy hand gestures to like summon monsters and things like that. From what I hear from other developers who have played the game, they say there's a lot of depth to that game, and it's actually going to be shipping with the touch controllers for free.
And all of these announcements, these games that you played, was at Oculus Connect, and I don't think the timing was coincidental, that this is also around the time of the PlayStation launching. This is set, of course, a little bit further ahead of time, but this is their chance to make a statement, because Oculus and HTC have both been out there for a while, and PlayStation is still newer. It hasn't launched yet. Not as many people have tried it out. Where do you think Oculus stands now that they've been on the market for a while? This is their chance to react to the PlayStation's launch as it's upcoming.
So, like, for me personally, I think I've been pretty critical of what Oculus has been doing. I think they were kind of wrong in the messaging of the initial price point. They said they was going to be in the ballpark of $350, ended up being like $600, and then the touch controllers are like another $200, and it's the most expensive a room scale setup, and there was a couple other things. Their initial DRM issues and things like that people didn't really like.
So did they turn it around with Oculus Connect?
I think so. I think coming into the event, if you were to ask me, and I think we did actually do a lobby segment on this, which my favorite VR headset was, I would have said the HTC Vive pretty confidently. No, I don't know. It's tough because the first wave of Oculus games were kind of, I don't know, they weren't great. They were kind of hit and miss, and they kind of some of them felt like tech demos. These games that I played felt really fun and polished, and it definitely felt like the second wave of VR games.
And was there any talk about going beyond games? Because for me, that's also a really interesting part of VR, that it's more than just gaming.
Yeah, so they had the Oculus Connect keynote in which Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, took to the stage, and he talked about some of the social aspects. And so you'll be able to like make calls in VR. That video has kind of gone viral a little bit of him calling his wife in VR and taking like a selfie, which is pretty trippy. You can create your own avatars. One thing that we kind of talked about it off camera earlier today is it's a very weird experience meeting somebody in VR because you feel, because I think when you have the headset strapped on in a single player scenario, it's kind of like this make-believe environment and it feels immersive enough, but there's a part of your brain that says like, this is still fake. But then when you have somebody else in that same environment corroborating what you're seeing, it suddenly becomes much more real and tangible.
Something we've seen a lot with the PlayStation VR experiences, even the multiplayer ones, are that they're still very traditional from a game perspective. Whereas Oculus, it did feel like their experience is made specifically for virtual reality, and that when you're interacting with somebody, like they're across the table from you, you know you're both wearing a headset, but it feels more real because
you forget that you are sometimes. So, I'll be like, follow me. I'm gonna toss the disc at you. Like go to my lower right, and then I'll toss the thing. I'll point. I'll be like, go down there, and then I'll chuck it at you as I fake going to the left. And you totally forget that you're in this cubicle thing wearing this headset.
So what do you think PlayStation and HTC's next moves are going to be? Like Oculus is. For you setting that standard, PlayStation is just about to launch, but what do they need to do next? What does HTC need to do to respond?
So I think HTC, they have a bunch of games. Lots of them are shovelware, unfortunately. Some of them are good, but they're low budget. And I wish Valve or HTC invested a little bit more money into polishing up those titles. I think Oculus is getting a lot of hate because of its exclusive content. But at the same time, on the flip side, Oculus could argue that without their funding, those games wouldn't be made. So there's that. And then I think on PSVR side, I think a lot of the games, there are some fun games. I think like Super Hypercube, I think it's called, is really fun. And then Thumper is really good as well. I feel though that those games can be retrofitted to work on a traditional monitor. So I feel like on PSVR's front, I think they need more compelling content that is geared towards VR.
Yeah, and Scott, I know you didn't go to Oculus Connect, obviously, but
not.
You've been playing a bit of the VR content as well. Have you been sold on any of these yet? Are you excited?
I've reviewed a couple of the PSVR games. Yeah, and I played a bunch of Vive earlier in the year. And I mean, I certainly agree with Jimmy that a lot of what we're seeing are sort of traditional games, not necessarily designed for VR, but still being implemented in VR. Like I just reviewed a game called Battlezone, which has been around since 1980, and it's a cockpit tank game. And obviously cockpits work great in VR. I mean, you have a sort of physical space around you. There's a clear explanation for why you're not moving, right? You're just seated, and that's still like, it allows your brain to become more immersed in what's happening around you. We've seen tons of cockpit games as a result. But yeah, you're still very disconnected from the people around you. Even in Battlezone, where you are playing with other people, it's a co-op game. You just sort of see their tank off in the distance. And yeah, you can kind of communicate in ways that you maybe couldn't in a traditional multiplayer space. But for the most part, it is still just, a very traditional take on like vehicle combat, right? So I'm more intrigued by stuff like, what Mark Zuckerberg was doing and talking about the social aspects that are possible with VR. And that to me is way more intriguing and exciting than anything we've seen as far as games go. I mean, some of the games have been totally fine, but again, like, could probably work just as well outside of VR. I mean, there really hasn't been a killer app in my mind in terms of games that really sells me on any of this hardware.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot more about games later on in the show. Of course, Oculus Connect, I think VR itself is just on the cusp. It's just beginning. It's just getting started. And we're going to learn a lot more. If you want to read more about virtual reality games, about virtual reality systems, stay tuned to GameSpot.com.